right, good morning. So Kevin and I had Kevin had asked Duane and I talk a little bit about law and the gospel, get some questions about how faith intersects with the justice system and maybe our jobs. And so interested to do that. I've known Duane for a while, and I think some of the things we're going to talk about are conversations we've had, I knew him before he even went to church here about, what justice system and how that works. And so we have a few prepared questions that we are going to work on. And forgot that part. We have a few prepared questions we're going to work on and maybe open it up for some questions at any time. And so we just decided to, instead of each of us talking for 15 minutes, it'd probably go better if we did a little more conversationally. So we're going to start by each introducing ourselves, maybe telling you a little bit about our what we do as lawyers, and also to vote. Kevin had asked us to work in some lawyer jokes. So since Kevin always opens with a joke, we figured we would follow in his form and put those up front. So guy walks into a crowded room and says, "All lawyers are jerks." One other guy says, "I take offense." First guy says, "What, are you a lawyer?" He said, "No, I'm a jerk." Also, do you know what the difference between a lawyer and a carp is? One is a scum-sucking bottom feeder and the other's a fish. I went to a CLE one time and this lawyer talked about how he didn't like lawyer jokes. He thought it disrespected the profession. I don't know. I think it's good to be able to laugh at yourself. I think they're funny. Most days I'm proud to be a lawyer. I think like any profession that's ever existed, we among lawyers have a few bad apples and they get a lot of press. But I've always been proud. I mean, law is still a self-regulating profession. That means that no government agency ever looks at, the Virginia State lawyers punish lawyers. They, regulate lawyers and things like that. And the ethical standards that we're held to, we don't always meet them. Like any standards are pretty high. So I'm proud to be a part of the profession most days, but I still like lawyer jokes. I've been practicing for about 22 years now, one in Roanoke and the rest in Stanton, at another firm for about 13 years, and my current firm for 8 or 9 years now. And I do some criminal traffic defense, things that are more like what Duane does when he explains, but also do a lot of civil work too. So I call myself a trial lawyer. Sort of, I go to court or get ready to go to court, whatever I do. Sort of differentiate that from what I don't do, which is what we call more transactional work. I don't write wills. I don't do a lot of business formation. So shorthand, I call myself a trial lawyer.
Hey, I'm Duane. I've been a public defender for about almost 18 years. So that's all I do is criminal defense, people that are appointed by the courts. So, the thing about lawyers' jokes is that most lawyers don't like lawyers' jokes, and then everybody else thinks they're true stories. I was thinking that, there used to be, you tell lawyer jokes because it sort of brings lawyers down from their, claim of high social status, but nowadays that's not really the problem. So there should be more doctors' jokes, it seems like, because they make all the money. So But for real, though, I have a lot of clients, and my clients really do have something in common with Abraham Lincoln. Everybody likes to claim Abraham Lincoln for various purposes, but my clients are very much like Abraham Lincoln because they're all innocent. Okay.
That's a Kevin joke.
So that's all my lawyer jokes. I already said that I was public defender for 18 years. All I do is criminal defense. And Kevin asked us to talk about this, and we both said more or less, sure. And then we thought it'd be more fun to do it conversationally. So if you have questions or if you want to jump in, if you disagree with us or if you have your own thoughts, just raise your hand or just shout it out. That'd be fine too.
Want to kick off our first substantive topic, justice and law?
Kevin gave us sort of this idea of talking about the difference between law and gospel. That's a big sort of theological question that's hard to answer because law works in sort of the New Testament in contrast to sort of Old Testament, New Testament type things. And that's a really big, deep theological subject, which I didn't feel particularly equipped to answer. So we kind of spun, I think, Kevin's question a little bit differently to talk about sort of the relationship to law and justice. And a lot of people, when they talk about justice, they think it means, putting things back right, giving the justice system is punishing criminals for doing bad things. And then there's this other side of justice, which means sort of doing things fairly, so there's procedural justice. And when I went to law school, I was sort of depressed, really, but I was unimpressed with law because it seemed to be mostly about procedure, like doing things in the right order. And there wasn't much concern, it didn't seem to me, with outcomes. And so I went to the graduate school after law school, which is sort of strange, but I went to UVA Religious Studies Department, and there's a class that I took with Mr. Childress called Love and Justice, and it was about the relationship between neighbor love and the sort of institutions of justice in our society, and how one of the ways we can approach the idea of justice is to approximate love. And so that was sort of an epiphany to me that I was loving, that the law could be about loving your neighbor. And so as a public defender, I think you get a chance to do that. Obviously, you have too many clients and it's busy, and they're difficult people. But you really, it is a lot of ways that you can reach out and sort of love your neighbor as a way of trying to seek justice for them. So that's, I think, was an epiphany for me, and for many people when they talk to me about my work, it's sort of surprising that there's the idea of neighbor love would even come into it, and I think that's surprising, particularly to prosecutors. But
yeah, I was thinking about this idea how the biblical mandate for justice impacts our work, and it was interested to do this with Duane because I knew I'd talked to him before. That I like the fact that we both, I think a lot about how our lives outside the law and how our faith should impact what we do, in the courtroom. But also I know from talking to him, sometimes we approach things slightly differently. I've always been of the idea, so in America we have this adversarial system of justice, right? Which sounds like a bad thing, but the idea is, differs from some other countries where, the judge does all the questioning, decides everything, that this side has a lawyer, this side has a lawyer, and if they both do a really good job, then maybe we have our best chance of coming to the right outcome, right? And I always think of it in terms of, like in my criminal defense work, I think of the idea that if I don't do a good job, if I'm lazy, if I don't go all out for my client, then there's a chance that an innocent person could get convicted, On the other hand, that if the prosecutor doesn't do their job well, there's a chance that someone guilty could go free or maybe get the wrong punishment. And so, I'm satisfied with that idea that, that's how we set it up, and that if everybody in the courtroom, if both lawyers and the judge do their best job, that maybe we have our best chance of coming to the right outcomes in whatever that is. So that's probably me thinking of it more procedurally, and that is the best we can do. I also come to it with the idea that we live in an imperfect world. We live in a fallen world, and that we have to accept that and do the best that we can, and that any idea that we can get something that does it perfectly as imperfect humans is not going to happen. And that's a little bit troubling. It's troubling to me that not every case is going to have the maybe right outcome, simply because it's a system that's put together by imperfect actors. But that's how somebody approach it. I think another part of the way that my faith just impacts my work that I work it in is that, one thing about, and I know this is certainly true for Duane, that we run across people when there are very difficult times in their lives. Usually if you're seeing one of us professionally, it's probably not your best day, But there's a benefit of that, right? I think if you can try to be compassionate and speak to people when they're in difficult times in their lives, then that is a good thing. And I guess I also sort of think about the idea of, when I think about what does it mean, what does Jesus want me to be a lawyer? I think of, the picture we have in some places in the Bible of Jesus being at the right hand of God and advocating for us, right? We see that picture sometimes, and that, that's what I can do for my clients. Sometimes the best I can do for them is sort of stand with them and be with them when they're going through a difficult time and, advocate for them.
Yeah, I mean, our criminal justice system in America is extremely punitive. We put people in prison for years and years, and we don't, I think, find ways to restore people to their communities. And there's at EMU and others, they're a leader in restorative justice, and there's lots of ways that there's some great theories out there, but in the practice, in the real world practice of criminal justice, we're not doing a very good job of restoring people to their communities, restoring relationships, and that's, we haven't got past the punitiveness of expelling people from society, and so it's a problem that we can continue to work on. It's a political problem, and it has a lot to do with how people think about the other in our communities.
That kind of leads us good into our second topic, which we're going to talk about. Kevin asked us about how does our current court penal system fail to live up to biblical expectations. And there were two sort of connected questions we talked about when it comes then, is to what degree when a person commits a crime is that a societal failure as opposed to a individual failure. And I sort of it relates to, wanting to kind of work into that, the question of how much of our criminal justice system is dealing with people who are have mental health or substance abuse issues. So I don't know, you want to kick us off on that? I remember years back before you even went here, we had a good conversation about some of your ideas on how, when someone comes for the criminal justice system, in some way it's a societal failure as opposed to just, a moral failure for that person.
Yeah, I think, we all come from our own brokenness, and when you are arrested by the police, it's often a result of some kind of brokenness like that. Substance abuse that goes back to childhood. People's childhood traumatic childhood experiences are so pervasive. People live difficult lives. Even in a relatively affluent country like the United States, the amount of trauma that we experience. So people come to their adult lives with substance abuse issues, with serious mental health issues, and then we don't have good systems to deal with those problems, and so they end up in courts, and they end up in our offices, and they end up in jail, and we don't invest the resources in those things. So it's a political problem. One of the people that brought me to the Mennonite tradition was John Howard Yoder, who has his own issues as well, but he really talks about the fact that the church is an alternative politic. That there's a different way of structuring. When we're talking about the world, we're always talking about how do we structure the world, and we don't. And one of the things the church does is transforms the way the world sees the other. And so, as the church, we can encourage the people who are, often they're Christians, but they're looking at these people as damaged or as dangerous or as as people that need to be controlled, and often they're just sick. And one of the things that I think the church teaches is that there is healing, and the healing is found in Christ, and so that opportunity for healing is always out there. And the Mennonite tradition, that has brought forth restorative justice and many of the kind of innovative criminal justice reform ideas is all about trying to find ways to heal people from the sort of the sickness that is. We call in the church, we call it sin, but we know the sin's something that we just have. It is an illness that we all sort of have, and that's I think when we just label people and we exclude them, we don't necessarily have the opportunity to really work to heal them. So that's I think one approach. So that as a community, if we invested more in substance abuse and mental health treatment, we might find that we could spend less on jails. That would be my hypothesis.
as we were preparing for this, and our church has been very involved in the Valley Mission. Duane and I both served on the board there, and one thing Susan Richardson, the director there, drove home to us all the time was that basically 90%, something like that, of the people who are at the Valley Mission are there because of a substance abuse issue or a mental health issue that hasn't been accurately treated. And I know Duane, you do a much larger volume of criminal defense than I do. I mean, is that somewhat true for your client base? I mean,
yeah, for sure. I mean, for everything from thefts to domestic assault and batteries to most of the violence is related to substance abuse in our community. I mean, there are communities, there are other places where there's some sort of real significant social breakdown that has even more, makes those communities more violent, and so we're maybe we don't suffer from as much of that, but family breakdowns and things like that. But so we don't have the same kind of gang violence and issues like that. But certainly, almost every domestic assault and battery case involves some sort of substance abuse. Almost every Walmart shoplifting case is somebody that's dealing with substance abuse. So it really is amazing how much that lies underneath of everything that's going on.
I know I think has been an attempt by the justice system to realize that to some degree. I mean, and again, you're more up to date than I am, but we have a drug court now in the area where people can be diverted. I think sort of tried to start a mental health docket in some places. The idea is that people can be identified and that there can be a criminal justice system that is more focused on treatment than it is on simply punishment. I guess you do it more. I guess I'm guessing, I shouldn't answer the questions for you, but that on you would say that we're making some strides in that area, but probably not enough. Would that be accurate? Yeah,
they're small. I mean, so there's maybe 15 people in drug court. There's maybe 20 people in the mental health docket. And there's other diversion programs too. The Augusta County has a diversion program where if you're caught with small amounts of drugs, you don't even get charged. You get brought into this treatment program. So there's ways in which we try to do that, but we haven't changed the system that is based on incarcerating people for these offenses. I mean, so they're still in the criminal justice system. The threat of incarceration still remains, and it's the only tool that the criminal justice system knows how to work well. I mean, so they know how to do that. Nobody else really knows how to do anything else. And so all these other mechanisms are admirable, but they haven't changed the sort of the baseline of what to expect when you get arrested is you're probably going to get some jail time. So. Yeah, so I think so despite the fact that I have been doing this for 18 years, I'm not up on the research behind incarceration, but anecdotally, I think short-term incarceration does change people's behavior probably. The real problem is we don't incarcerate people for short terms, we incarcerate people for 4 years. And so, people are held for a long period of time. Virginia doesn't have parole, so it doesn't really matter if you're changed your life, if you've reformed, if you're doing great, and you got a sentence, you're going to serve the sentence. And so it's really, it's very punitive. In the United States in general, I mean, the United States gives out jail sentences, prison sentences that far exceed the rest of the Western world. I mean, by scales of, you might get, you get 30 years in the United States, and you might get 10 in Europe for many offenses. So, and it's just really different in how they think about your ability to come back and to be restored to your community. So, right, yeah. In 1995, it was part of the George Allen's Truth in Sentencing, and they eliminated parole, and yeah. Yeah. That's great. We talked a little bit about.
Yeah, that was one of the sort of questions I had in the back. Maybe sort of ties into that. Sometimes I get the question from Christian clients. 1 Corinthians 6, Paul talks about, you shouldn't be taking each other to court. And if I ask the question about, what's proper in that case, and I'm not sure I know the answer to that. I think, like a lot of writings of Paul, sometimes that's a particular situation. But generally, to your question, I think, yes. I mean, divert things away from the legal system. It's costly. It's expensive. Being involved in litigation, it's even coming from a lawyer, is hard on people in terms of money. All of it, it is hard in terms of the time it takes, and then just the emotional toll. Frequently I find myself trying, having someone come in and saying, I'm having this problem, and usually they're worked up by that point. I want to sue someone. I want to fix this through the legal system. And trying to counsel them, you may want to try some other ways. You may want to try some other ways to resolve that are more effective, I try to explain to them, like, I'm speaking against my own interest, because, you could give me a lot of money to go through a very emotionally taxing process. But yeah, think about, if that's something you really want to do. Have you talked to that person? Are there other ways to resolve it? So, yeah, absolutely. Even as a lawyer, I think the legal system, in many cases, should be a place of last resort. And as we've also talked about, it doesn't always come to the right. You may feel very passionate that you have the right side in the given dispute, but that doesn't mean that the legal system is going to agree.
Yeah, I think it's a hard question, because it certainly, for a lot of things, we could say, yeah, don't call the police, don't involve the criminal justice system. But there's the experience of, the Catholic Church and other churches that have sort of maybe had that idea in the back of their mind when they have not pursued, criminal charges for a whole range of really serious issues, and that it turned out not to be restorative. It turned out not to be rehabilitative. So I think it's a really hard question. I certainly think, we should recognize that when we're involving the courts, we're involving the, instruments of state violence. And what does that mean for our commitments to nonviolence? If we call the police, we're availing ourselves of state violence. Maybe we need that. I don't think that there are no situations where you would defend another person. And I think those are the kinds of places where we probably do make exceptions to, turning the other cheek is for yourself, maybe not for the vulnerable other person. And maybe there's a place for standing in between. There's a place for standing in between a vulnerable person and somebody who's exploiting them. But that it very much is availing ourselves of state violence. And so I think that's a tough call if we have a commitment to nonviolence.
Yeah, that's a great point. I hadn't thought of that. There definitely been cases, points in times in history that in the church that, in the name of restorative justice or dealing with it in-house, it's been used as to cover up abuse, in lots of situations. Yeah. I know that. Oh, sorry. I didn't-
Yeah, so I think it's certainly church leaders, church elders, church, people involved in the, in the church can certainly play that role. And they, I mean, I think probably that happens already. I mean, and I think people probably go to, people go to their pastors and such for counseling and for dealing with those kind of disputes. So, I mean, I think that probably is what's happening. But, the ways, I mean, I think we could be more intentional probably about saying, hey, we can try to resolve disputes inside the church. That's still difficult because it's not, it has the risk of the same issues that we talked about earlier. It has the risk of not being taken seriously, and so you don't want the person who is suffering from domestic violence to just go to the pastor and the pastor says, turn to the cheek, and they go home and worse things happen, right? I mean, so those are really hard questions. Those are really hard questions. And I don't know how to answer them, but I think if we have structures of, of community, I mean, community can function in those ways. I mean, so if we do have friends in the church, we do turn to them, and if we have friends in the church, if we remember that calling the police is sort of a last resort, that does involve state violence, then maybe we can find ways to try to minimize the violence. But I don't know. I think those are hard. It's sort of out of your hands. It's up to the police. Yeah.
We were talking about, that's a conversation to have with people a lot. So the idea of, when the criminal case is bought, it is Commonwealth versus person. And I know Duane has these conversations, and the person says, I want to drop the charges. I'm like, they're not your charges. That in a civil system, on the civil side, you have individual versus individual. On the criminal side, it's reported to the police. Somebody may report it, the victim, but at that point, the charge belongs to the Commonwealth. Prosecutor has every right to say, I'm aware that a crime has been committed or I've been reported to me, and I want to pursue that, regardless of your desire. Kind of I think it's one of those things that was, I sort of think of it as, when a crime has been committed, the idea is it's sort of a crime against all of us, against the peace. And I think you called it
it's against the king.
Against the king.
Against the king.
The king.
Right. The king's law has been wronged, and the king has to be vindicated, which is the source of the criminal justice system. Yeah. That's where it came from.
Yeah.
Well, we're out of time, but
no.
Yeah.
I just wanted to echo one thing you said, and then you tell a quick story about the young.
Oh, sure.
So,
No, the first part, yes.
just in terms of societal ill versus individual morality, I think in our office we will often see a kid who say, that kid doesn't think that he's dead. And then we're not surprised 12 or 15 years later when we see him. And it's really a helpless feeling for us. It's like, well, this is not a medical problem. You don't know what to do to try to help or do the work and stuff. So I think from my perspective, there seems to be a lot of that. Like happen. I'm kind of at a loss. The story I want to tell about Duane, I've never been cross-examined by a kid. But years ago, before I knew Duane, he cross-examined me. I unfortunately had to testify in a number of child abuse cases. And I was testifying in a child abuse case. Well, and I've had some bad experiences with testifying before, with people trying to twist my words around, make up medical conditions that don't exist, that sort of thing. I remember this one case I was called as a witness, and I said what I had to say. Duane was a defense attorney, and I didn't know anything about him. And he asked me a very honest, straightforward question, defending his client.
I mean, I'm competitive by nature, and part of it, I mean, part of how I find my faith impacting my work is, sometimes I'll be getting ready for court or a cross-examination, and I'll be particularly ginned up, and it's like in the moments before, I have to be like, remember you're a human, remember this other person is, and you're a representative, those are moments that I do think about my faith, and I was like, all right, just dial it back a little bit. You have something other to do here other than to figure out a way to verbally disembowel someone else. But yeah, I will say back to what you said about, the societal failure. I mean, I like Duane a lot. He's a great guy. And I remember that conversation, just resonated with me for a while, because he was like, I think when people come here, it's a societal failure. And initially, my, sort of personal responsibility, free will, make your choices for your life. Like, I pushed back on that at first. I was like, what sort of hippie talk is that, Duane? But that's why I look forward to this conversation, because whenever I have those conversations with Duane, I appreciate his perspective and the pushback. And like with most good friends, his perspective has changed my perspective in some ways.
Yeah, so one sort of last word of encouragement. There's a book that I read a while back with John Howard Yoder and a lawyer who was a professor at Notre Dame, and it's called Conversations with the Hoosier. I forgot the name of the book, but at any rate, at some point they're talking about whether this idea can a Christian be a lawyer, and what Yoder says is the question isn't whether a Christian can be a lawyer, is does a lawyer do things that Christ does, right? And so that's true for all of our professions, all of our jobs, all of our callings, is that we're, as whatever it is that we do in life, we're trying to do the things that Jesus does through that particular avenue. So. So the great thing about being a public defender is I get to visit people in prison, like Jesus did. But for many of you, I mean, you get to teach them. You get to, minister, help. You get to heal them. You get to all the different ways in which we get to serve our neighbors and love our neighbors, and show the love that Jesus showed. And that's sort of, I think, the encouraging thing we all can do, and bring the gospel to our world.
Sounds like a good place to end.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.